Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in to episode 5/6 here of Product Musings. I'm not going to continue to, I think, always say what episode it is because as I have maybe some of these mini musings, it could throw some things off. But today, I want to talk about something that's been around for a long while, and that's what Brian Chesky said about product management at Figma, actually back in 2023. So it was like June or so of 2023. And I have continued to see it pop up over time. There's been a lot of analysis as well of what's happened to Airbnb since then and what it means for product management in general. And I think a lot of the approaches come from a sense of fear or worry or try to completely kick aside his comments and say, oh, he didn't mean it. And so just briefly kind of want to talk a little bit more about what I think you should actually take away from this comment and how to sort of assess it. And so briefly, Brian Chesky is the CEO and founder of Airbnb. He's been the head of Airbnb since, ever since its existence, which has been quite a long time now. Has really changed the way we think about hospitality and travel. And at FigmaCon 2023, Brian Chesky dropped a comment that they got rid of the product management function at Airbnb. And a few things on that comment that I think are really interesting. The first one you hear about is that apparently all the designers in the room cheered, which is one of those things that as a product manager makes you maybe want to get almost angry in some way, right? Like they're cheering for the end of my role. And I really think it's a good point of reflection, which is if someone hears that comment and they cheer, what does that mean? Like what are you providing to that person? And something that product and design should be so tied at the hip. Why are they cheering at the end, perhaps, of that role as it was sort of given in that context? Something to really think about. And I think there's a lot of reasons why, and perhaps we'll touch on that. But, in doing that, the comment was a lot around the idea that product management as a function is not necessary, not needed. And you can look at the continued sort of growth of Airbnb, certainly post the COVID era and the adjustments out of that. And there's some thoughts that, what is the idea coming from this? And so Brian Chesky, he had a lot of sort of follow-ups, comments, interviews, etc. One of the best ones, I think, is an interview he had with Lenny Rashitsky, I believe is his name. One of course, the most famous podcasters in product management and phenomenal product manager as well, and actually worked at Airbnb as one of their earlier product managers. And he had to sit down with Brian Chesky, and I would highly encourage you to just listen really to the entire conversation. But from that, what Brian really talks about is not getting rid of product managers, but rather instead refocusing that function and thinking about how it should be spread into perhaps different areas, but that work is still being done. Specifically at Airbnb, a lot of that work was transitioned either into product marketing or into program managers. And there's a lot of sort of key ways to why it was transitioned in that way and the value that sort of brought out of that. Now, one of the biggest things that looking at this transition, I think first starting at the program management level, and why that's so important is it enables you to think of things more holistically rather than just your own specific product. When you have to think about how an entire function works, an entire product or engineering function, or how design works across an entire application, it enables you to think about much larger pictures of what that user experience is going to be and what you're actually going to be delivering at the end of the day. And many times as a product manager, you can get so laser focused on just your corner of the application or the wider picture that you forget about how it needs to tie into this other work that someone else is doing. And not only tying into that work, but how they're both building to a great experience holistically. I have worked on products and I have worked with many products that have a disjointed interface, a disjointed experience as a whole. And it feels like it was designed either by two entirely different sets of product teams that were focused completely differently. Perhaps they were separated by time. Maybe one was far earlier and then one far later. But there's no holistic view across all that whole thread. And by moving out of this singular product manager function and into the wider role of actual program management, that maybe isn't as detail focused on the specific feature, but rather instead the wider, gamut of these different operations and functions working together, you have that ability to build that more holistic vision. I think this works really great, for example, like a design function, right? When you're having to think about how does your design have a common set of tools, features, sort of little motifs that people can build on throughout the entire product. And the same can be said for, your verbiage and how you actually think about, product experiences having the overall same goal and end mindset. And that same thread can be brought into engineering, where you're thinking about how things are built in a lot of more homogeneous ways. And so in that product program management mindset, you're really enabling that. And as a product manager, I think if you are not thinking about that, which many don't, just because of the burden of the work that they're currently doing, it leads to not only a lot of the tactical reduplication, creating things that are already built in some way or another, missing some high points, missing some key learnings from others. Not only are you missing those more tactical pieces, but you don't enable your own product to have the best actual value path, because people don't get a seamless experience as a whole. And what may work best on a metrics perspective for your individual product, your individual experience, certainly if tested in a silo, may not work best when it's deployed into a larger environment with multiple product managers working together. And when you start to do this, you get bogged down with incredible amounts of A/B testing, which is good, but can be overdone. Analytics, which is phenomenal. I just did a whole talk, a whole podcast on that. Love them to death. But you get bogged down into this actual inaction state because you're not driving this holistic vision forward. And so that's really where program management comes from, and that move particularly. And then you look at the product marketing side, which is honestly one of my favorite parts of product management. I like to think, all the different areas of product management. And probably if you talked about any individual one, I might say at that point in time, it's my favorite. I love product design. I absolutely love the engineering side and getting to write code now and then. But the product marketing is especially interesting because, thinking about not just your product as a feature or your product as a solution, but how it will actually play out in the market you're approaching, and being able to drive that value for those people and those customers. That is really where something goes from being a product to an actual solution. And that important step along this, what I like to call the problem solution product pipeline, is so critical. And when you're thinking about that marketplace, you need to be thinking about, not just where you're deploying into, but how will you market it in that type of area? What is the actual strategy, the positioning, the voice, the message? You have to think about how you're going to sell it to those individual customers. What is that approach? Is it a product-led growth approach? Is it a sales-led growth approach? Is it one where you're giving people maybe like a free trial sort of solution set? What is that approach? How are you going to price it? That's something that many product managers like to hand off, and I think absolutely you need to be deep in the weeds of understanding the individual numbers that you're approaching for this pricing sector. If you're building a product for a problem and you're pricing it 10 times higher than the average customer is willing to pay, you no longer have a solution. You no longer have something that can actually work for that customer. You have a great product and you have the right problem, but you have the wrong solution because you way overpriced it. And if you sell it too low, then you may have a great product that's a great solution for the right people, but you're not going to be able to build a company in that solution set, right? And you can easily be overrun by others that are able to deliver more value because people are willing to spend more, and therefore they can get an even better product. And that's how you need to be thinking about this pricing sector along with that marketing aspect. And at Airbnb, they've taken those approaches that many product managers have and incorporated that into the actual product marketing function as well as the deliverables out of that. I know Datadog is another company that really targets all of those different areas within their product management function. And so if you're looking at a company that has the same mindset perhaps as Airbnb, but hasn't taken that exact approach and has really doubled down on product management. I think Datadog's a great example. Another phenomenally successful company that is now public, and their product managers own a ton of the approach around the design, the larger thinking, the product marketing, the pricing, the sales strategy. They own all of that. And so instead of just having, the name titled, perhaps those pieces have become more ingrained within that product management role. And so that's what's really key and critical about this move, is that sure, Airbnb maybe got rid of the title, but the role still exists. It's just been, in this area, either spread to two different solutions, in a product marketing or program management, but really sort of creating a space for those ideas to dive deeper into the weeds rather than having, high level sort of views at the product management layer and then sort of silos of that information across. And when you're thinking about this sort of restructure, I think there's a couple things you need to think about as well, right? So again, knowing your market, you need to know what the wider product is, where you're fitting within, if you're developing a specific feature or a product within a larger product, how does yours fit into the entire story? And is it a solution that obviously makes sense? Is it a solution that's really needed now? Is it something that will open you up to sort of a different break in your story? What does that even mean? Let me clarify. One of my favorite comments, I believe, is from the CEO of Intercom, I think is what it was, who was once talking to someone, and that person said, I forget the Intercom CEO's name, but let's just call him Steve. And they said to Steve, if you add these 2 or 3 critical features, not only will you be great at what you currently do, but you also will become an analytics company because you have all these different areas that you can now provide value in. And Steve said, that's right. However, now we would have the problems of an analytics company. And that's something that I've seen so many companies sort of fail when they're trying to break into a new area. Well, now they have to compete on a different vector, and they may not be prepared to compete in that space. And that may be a huge detriment. And so if you're launching a product or a feature that's in a new area and you're not prepared to compete in that space at the level that you need to compete, you need to know that when you're talking about your wider product story. And you can't just be launching a product that adds value on top of your current product, but you have to know how it adds value to your entire story. Many different examples across the space that you can think of where this really hits, and certainly some that I have felt, personally. And then when you also get to, I want to talk about, metrics. A lot of product managers get so focused on metrics specifically. And of course, yeah, they're great, and you need to know them. You need to know where they align. What I think a lot of product managers do, though, is they get incrementally focused, singularly focused on what's my North Star metric, and then how can we push it up and push it up and push it up and adjust it. And how, if the numbers don't look great, how can we either adjust the metric or adjust some of the numbers or adjust our process? And that leads to small thinking. And when you're developing small thinking, especially in a massive bureaucratic process in a larger company, your small thinking not only barely improves the product, but takes forever to happen as well. And, one of the things Brian Chesky, I believe, says in that interview with Lenny is, that the idea of adding a zero, the 10x thinking, though, is really the concept that's thought of, which is how can you make big, bold changes and improvements and draft bigger ideas. And when you set those metrics at, hey, we wanted to do $1 million in ARR this year. Let's set the new goal to 10 million. You're very likely not going to hit 10 million, but what it forces you to do is think differently. You can't optimize your way to a 10x improvement. You simply can't. So you have to think differently. And when you're thinking that different approach, it enables you to have these ambitious goals that you can sort of releases the shackles of being stuck in this iterative thinking mindset that bleeds into a bureaucratic process that enables a slow development and slow release time of great value, and instead improves this dramatic new thinking for ambitious delivery. And don't let these metrics overrule your intuition. In that conversation, podcast talking about Groupon, right? A great scenario where the metrics showed that sending 2 emails a day would deliver better value. But if you were just thinking on your intuition, nobody wants 2 emails a day from Groupon. And that sort of cycle of thought needs to be there. That's why you need to know your market. It's why you need to know your customers, because you cannot allow metrics to drive your decision making without your own intuition in the mix. And when you take all of that together, that's really where Airbnb was targeting with their new approach, which is, let's stop being so stuck around these processes and these incremental improvements and these consistent testing points and all these extra user tests. Let's think bigger. Let's drive faster and deliver a harmonious experience for everyone, really across the entire platform. And in order to do that, you can't think feature by feature. You need to think wider. And so Airbnb took this approach, which I fully think is a great one that's worked well. And listen, it's easy to hear someone say they got rid of your role and be afraid and feel attacked. Absolutely, I felt that the first time. It's natural. You think that this big company that's doing well and they just got rid of my role, is everyone else going to follow suit? It's easy to think that way, but it's an incredible data point. And I think it's important to seek to understand. And you can find other data points where, perhaps either A, this hasn't worked quite well. If they had just gotten rid of PMs and said, we're not changing anything else, we're just getting rid of that role, of course there would be dramatic adjustments that would have to happen. Either A, you would see that happen maybe at a smaller company where the founder steps back into that product manager role, where they probably should be for a long time, or you have to see engineering managers take over a lot of that different area as well. But you don't see a ton of success without that expertise being driven into different areas and then made deeper. So seek to really understand what was meant by that. Again, I think Datadog's a scenario where they took really a lot of the same ideas, but charged them into the product management function rather than distribute them out. And that's worked really well for them as well. So when you're thinking about how your role fits, focus on driving tremendous value and not just adding process, not just adding a new communication point, but really adding tangible value, diving deep into the weeds, understanding your market, understanding your pricing, understanding your customers, so you can actually deliver something that's going to be tangible and real and value added. Lastly, last point I want to make, don't overthink the importance of your role or what you do. It's oftentimes that PMs will become the center of the sort of communication sphere because sales is talking to you, marketing wants to know from you, and engineering is sort of delivering updates, and design is working with you. Don't overthink your importance. Understand where you fit in that mindset. It's certainly something I've had to learn over time, and building on that understanding is there are others that are able to do a lot of that key work as well, and you need to leverage and really build on them in that space rather than trying to think that because you're the PM, the title, the CEO of the product has gone around. And I really dislike that phrase because it's completely inaccurate. For one, the CEO is the CEO of the product. But number two, it really just, again, sort of elevates the egos of PMs. And I think it's important to stay grounded and understand how you can deliver great value in what you actually do so that your role isn't going away, but instead it's just continuing to be deepened and enabled. So that's my thoughts on the Airbnb story. I think they've continued to show that it's worked really well. And I highly encourage to really take the real nuggets of wisdom from it and apply it to how you work as a product manager. That's all I've got for this one, but I hope you have enjoyed this brief talk. Let me know if you have anything else that you think would add value to these types of stories. And please feel free to subscribe. Certainly helps out the podcast. And I'll catch you in the next one. Thank you.